Harry Higgins by Jay Elliot Davis. The undead smoker, dressed according to ancient Egyptian ritual, did not seem to notice my company there on the porch at first. Nevertheless, I craved nicotine, had the courage and audacity of drink, so could not be deterred from the words, "Pardon me, sir." He flicked a beady eye in my direction, and I took it as my cue to continue. But there was no need to go on, as he'd at once thrust a hand through the flap in his costume, producing a pack of my favorite brand. I took a cig, acknowledged his generosity with a nod while I lit it, then expressed my thoughts on several topics. As I've said, I was rather drunk at the time and tended to do most of the talking. In fact, the mummy mumbled only 3 words to me that night. The first occurred toward the end of my monologue on personal hygiene, for the man smelled badly of perspiration and musk. When I came about to asking his last name, a habit of mine to ask the last name first, he said something like, Higgins. And when I asked if he meant by that Higgins, he nodded his head. The second strange utterance the mummy spoke was, which meant Harold, apparently. The third and last thing he said before rushing off into the darkness was, and I took it as a hearty no in answer to my query as to whether or not he might sometimes go by Harry. I then returned to the snack tray for a few more crackers, found my body mask and my fiancée, bid several adieus, and escorted Samantha back to her apartment. Along the way, we talked of many things, including the costumes we'd observed at the Halloween ball, and I asked her if she'd had a chance to talk to the man dressed up like a mummy. She said she had, at great length, as a matter of fact, and demanded to know where I'd been during his magic trick, which had both startled and amazed the crowd. I mentioned several places throughout the house that I might have been at that time, also making reference to the patio where I'd spent half the night and had met Mr. Higgins myself. She then slipped her arm from me and sighed. "Sometimes I wish you could be more like Harold." I took offense and told her so. She moved away. I apologized and wrapped my arm about her waist again. Eventually, we came to the step and I said goodbye. She then slammed the door in my face. Making my way home, it occurred to me that Higgins had come off as rather a lout, actually. Later in the week, I learned the man had snubbed 4 of my male friends at the party, but had been somewhat of a success with the ladies in the group. I never brought it up again, and Samantha softened at length. Our wedding took place on the designated day at a cathedral on 6th Avenue. Monks of the Order of St. Gregory inhabited the place. I immediately regretted my choice of venue. The chaste men sang a song that was depressing. Their garb set a somber mood, but we continued. What else could we do? When we'd given the vows and the rings and each other a kiss, when I carried my bride outdoors and the rice had been thrown and our mothers had wept, when the gowns on the borrowed car had been dragged through the town to the reception, where champagne was duly served and the excellent food that had been prepared began to be consumed, I considered the expense and was further depressed, for I could not help but feel somehow foolish. I don't know why. Samantha, however, was in a fine mood and proposed a toast to the monk at our table that had followed on foot. He was sitting betwixt my sister and a female cousin of the bride. They giggled and poked him with their spoons. Perhaps they were amused at the black hooded robe and wrote the graphic rosary he wore. Of course, I found him morbidly out of place at my wedding reception in his veil and those dirty black leather gloves. In fact, I happened to notice that not an inch of the man's flesh was visible. I frowned. Somehow, someone smelled badly and then blinked. Musk. Allow me, I said, to make the toast, and stood abruptly with my glass in hand. To Harry, who goes so often by Harold, I think. His last name is Higgins, but I call him just Harry. Harry Higgins. And I repeated the words Harry and Higgins until at length the monk shook a terrible shake. I shall never forget the shake that he shook, and slowly turned his awful veiled face towards me. Indeed, it was he. He lunged like an animal. He approached. The women screamed, and the men formed a posse, when all bore witness to the knife in his insidious grip. Finding himself thus greatly outnumbered, Higgins rushed for the hotel with demon speed. My friends, I said, please allow a new toast. And I meant to go on about love and my beautiful wife. Alas, she disappeared. I later learned in pursuit of her lover. Only one or two hangers-on remained for the actual meal. I drank myself into a hysterical rage, then ran screaming through the streets until I was arrested. In jail, I learned a detail or two about Mr. Higgins. Most of the prisoners knew firsthand of the lecherous beast. For example, a man who went by the name of Brass Knuckles made a typical comment once as we were enjoying the meal. Fellow named Higgins ran off with my Sue, he said. Such a statement was sure to set off a ruckus in our section. Many within earshot made loud promises of revenge. Chaos inevitably ensued and order could be restored, but with difficulty in the event of the word Harold, Harry, or Higgins at all, as all of the men knew of his philandering, and he was passionately hated. This story was always the same. His modus operandi was obvious. Higgins operated literally under wraps. Any pretext for a covering was sufficient to bring him hither, provided there were ladies available to make the effort and outing worth his while. I am to this day amazed at the success he had with them. In any event, he stank profoundly of musk and other musty stuff. So it must have been the man of mystery image that attracted so many women to him. Following my confinement, I stayed with a friend for on returning to my room, I found the locks had been changed. After 2 months in jail, I was not surprised to discover new tenants inhabiting the place. My idiot wife had recklessly expended the savings and had overdrawn our account with checks. All of my belongings had therefore been repossessed or were auctioned off to pay the debt. I was in a desperate situation. In my wedding clothes with no money, nor even a wallet with documents to prove my identity, cold, hungry, and homeless. I felt fully the weight of the situation that had befallen me. It is not easy to imagine perhaps pigeons conspiring to kill a man. Yet the flocks, each every movement in the air or rushing hither and thither in the street suggested some murderous ill will towards me that day. Elderly women do not seem especially dangerous, nay, to those with a crumb in the stomach, for they are not mad with hunger and staring into the hag's face. Sitting at the bus bench, sparing change, I saw their wrinkles deepen, take on malign new vectors, become hateful, cruel, evil. The witches hissed at me like alligators. The waitresses refused me even water, and the young men ignored me when I wanted a smoke or simply asked them for the dime. Everyone seemed to know right away somehow that I was finished, and I wandered the icy streets with nothing and no hope. I was the target of every insult, prey to a limitless hidden dimension of street life. I was down on my luck, and the lunatics knew it. They moved in closer with their yellow talons, whispering curses or shouting aloud, shuffling after me until swallowed, as I knew that I must be also digested and metabolized by the unforgiving concrete. At the point, I was followed by a babbling fiend with blood and filth on his face and clothing, fearing the worst through in truth. I knew not what the worst might be. I followed paper snowflakes, mistletoe, and bells into a shopping complex for greater safety in the crowd. Slipping artfully from store to store, I soon lost the bleeding bum. Later I saw him detained by security. This warmed me a bit. Soon infected by the Christmas spirit, I pretended to shop, eventually convinced myself I'd felt a trinket on a shelf somewhere for a dime, and a quarter or less even became obsessed with making such a purchase. Yet, the cheapest tinfoil ornament was over $1 plus tax. Approaching the central mezzanine of the mall, I came to a mini train carting children through the artificial snow. The North Pole was indicated by a sign on a painted candy cane post. Here, green elves with bells on pointy shoes capered about Mrs. Claus, a woman of enormous proportion, and led the little ones to a sleigh containing the star of the show, old Saint Nick. Then I observed that Santa's face was in fact a plastic mask. A chill passed through my body, not a bit of skin visible. Imagine my indignation when I saw the children kept back from Claus by their mothers, one of whom sat on the covered man's lap, laughing like a horse. Whiffing musk, I called his name, for I knew it was he, Higgins. His head jerked in my direction. "Harry Higgins," I bellowed, rushing up the gingerbread steps to seize him. He flung his customer with force to the floor, where she sprawled and screamed like an angry goose, legs flying, arms flapping after the scattered contents of her purse. Then bolted through the holiday mob with supernatural speed. I gave chase, and at length we came to the street. Alas, a parade was in progress. He quickly blended with the crowd. He had escaped. For many days I wandered aimlessly, taking alms for the poor and meals from the left-behind plates of light eaters. At night I slept in commuter trains. Having curled up thus one evening in my cozy seat, I was awakened by a friend. Peter, who had been the best man at my disastrous wedding, was appalled to find me there, thus cruelly reduced to vagrancy. He offered me the warmth and safety of his home, a couch to sleep on until I'd managed a job and some money and whatever clothes I might need, as my tuxedo was by then foul and rancid with the city filth. I accepted his kind offer, of course. In the evenings we ate celery stew, his staple food, a combination of stocks and vegetable broth that was bland, and things worked out well between us. He was an unstoppable talker, and I was too depressed at the time to cut in very often on the conversations he enjoyed to have with himself in my presence. One night he meaningfully approached the topic of human pregnancy. I offered my own viewpoint, although not very interested in the subject, until he mentioned an epidemic of the affliction in our village. He went on to say that many of our mutual friends appeared to be in the process of reproduction. I preferred to avoid any talk of Samantha, but inquired as to whether or not, and if so, in what condition Peter had seen her since I'd been away. He cleared his throat, put down the soup, raised an eyebrow, and reached for his pipe. "Well?" "Pregnant," he said, taking a puff. "Higgins," I screamed. My friend then confessed he'd seen her in a covered man's company many times. "Pregnant?" "Unmistakably, yes. Heavy with child." "Higgins," I screamed again, overturning the soup with a flying fist. Peter gasped. I raked my fingernails over my face. He grunted. I sobbed. He sneezed. I blessed them, and he thanked me. Peter then revealed a painful secret. Olivia, his girlfriend of many years, had run off with Higgins too, it seemed. They'd met the fiend at an automotive store and service station on MacArthur Boulevard. He, Higgins, had worn the ridiculous costume of a cartoon tire man at the time. A fun-loving girl, Olivia had wrapped her arms around the creature on a sudden impulse. Of course, Peter saw no harm in the gesture at first, and had left them together as he made a purchase. Later, Meaning to collect his girlfriend and get going, he found her crazily twirling with the silly man. Becoming annoyed, Peter attempted to cut the fun short. Olivia, however, could only be extricated by threats. On the drive home, she had seemed preoccupied. When he called her the next day, she complained of a headache and had canceled their dinner date, craving a sandwich. In any case, Peter had therefore gone to the restaurant by himself. On the way home, acting on a hunch, he took a detour past the service station on MacArthur again. There, in spite of heavy traffic, and ignoring the jeers of passers-by, he found Olivia and the tire man clutching one another disgustingly. Outraged, Peter swerved into the parking lot and honked his horn. Higgins mumbled some nonsense. Olivia, who Peter described as blushing like a pig, made a scene and told him they were finished. Peter said it was certainly so, and returned to his car, heartbroken. He watched Olivia disappear into an alley with her abominable mate, and left the two to their horrid affair. Of course, I lost all love for her at that moment, he ended. But he must be stopped. Peter, lighting his pipe, winked and smiled slyly through the smoke. Indeed he must, and he will be. He then reached in his pocket and handed me a small pink envelope edged with red lace. My God, I said, for it stank of perfume. Open it. I did so. Inside was a silver ticket. New Year's Eve ball. Joli monde to sing. Je t'aime toujours. And other chants d'amour. Interpretive ballet by Les Belles de Toulon. Champagne hors d'oeuvres. Admit one. 8 p.m. December 31st, Chateau des Dames, 16th Vine Avenue. Costume required. Indeed, it was an ingenious plot. Peter, assisted by Claude Marseille, whose family owned and operated the Chateau des Dames, had planned and prepared everything months in advance. Claude had been done an injustice also, and the feat was in fact a front to attract, capture, and expose the enemy of men, Harry Higgins. The more I learned, the more I was pleased with their plan, the more I was glad to have been taken into Peter's and at length into Claude Marseille's confidence. From the scented admission slips to the beautiful, widely famed performers booked, even the venue itself, the women's school of ballet, all had been brilliantly conceived and set into motion. On the anticipated eve, I was at last introduced to the smallish, good-looking young Frenchman with a nervous twitch and a bone-crushing grip, Claude Marseille. Ah, passe tout, he'd said when I thanked him for the costume. We three, he, Peter, and I, were dressed as musketeers for the farce. There was no time to lose. It was already 6:30 when Peter and I had arrived, and Several guests were already kneeling about the impromptu bar taking drinks. We therefore removed to the stage behind closed curtains to rehearse the arrest of Harry Higgins, much to the consternation of Jolie Monde and Les Belles de Toulon, who hadn't yet situated the props for their performance. Sortez, said Claude, and we drew our sabers to chase them away. Get out, out. The ladies left without a fight, and Claude placed an uncorked bottle of excellent champagne between us to represent the subject of our study. Several scenarios were then thoroughly worked through, yet every time we seemed to have determined a good point of progress, Peter was dissatisfied. He'd light his pipe and say, "He'll get away, look here," and point in some new direction with his sword. He'd evidently assumed an uncharacteristically superstitious attitude on the capture of Higgins, who had become a diabolical figure in his eyes, perhaps inhuman, maybe immortal. Here I inclined to agree with Claude, who laughed. C'est home is stupid. Only a coward, no problem, Peter. He's just so ugly, always in his mask. I added that Higgins might suffer from a chemical imbalance of some kind, conceivably due to poor diet, hereditary factors, or simply through overuse of nicotine and alcohol, in which case he would be easily overcome. We three, uncorking a new bottle, eventually surrendered the stage and mingled with a rush of guests, then lined about the food trays for an early snack. The masqueraders were clad for the most part in elegant attire, with just some secondary masks to meet the advertised admittance criteria. There was, however, a good Pinocchio. In any event, the long nose belonged to no wooden boy, but to a she. The proverbial liar was tellingly big in the belly, as were most of the girls installed about the hors d'oeuvre table that memorable evening. Olivia, too, who I recognized from a photograph, was evidently in a family way, or preggies, as Peter put it somewhat sarcastically. She and the girlfriend were dressed as flappers and put on airs with horrid little dog with a smashed-in face and a weird brassiere about its waist. Claude and Peter removed to the vestibule, and I joined them at length. "Look there," said Peter at a point. "It's him," I said, crushing in. We beheld a pitiful figure, a man costumed as a ghost, moving with difficulty through the snow. He was covered in a muddy, bloody sheet. This was soiled most notably about the knees. "He's been attacked already, the bastard," said Peter. "Alors," said Claude. "By dogs, I ventured. Mon Dieu." Higgins continued moving slowly toward us. The wind picked up and he was nearly disrobed. Then we glimpsed a red pant leg in shreds. "He's fallen on hard times," said Peter. "Attacked by a beast," I insisted. "Par des gens." We could see the ticket in his bulky mitten. Then Higgins fell, and it fluttered away. He lay motionless in the snow for some time. Meanwhile, the party was picking up. Jolimon had been speaking in French as the dancers filed in for the prelude to their exquisite performance. And then there was music, applause, some hooting and a holler, as I recall. All was going well and much according to plan as we set out across the lawn to seize our special guest. The freezing wind slowed us. The gusts of pelting ice and snow drove us from our objective on occasion. But we came upon him through the blinding weather in time to find him still breathing. Higgins, ha, said Peter, thrusting forth a sharpened sword to stop him should he make a move. Arrête. Take his legs, I said, and we dragged him through the snow to the Chateau des Downs. What then occurred is completely ridiculous. We stormed the stage with our prey and propped him against the piano. Unveiled the fiend, someone somewhere screamed, and the sheet was pulled from his body. But what? How? There again the plastic mask of claws, the red Santa suit, white fur and black rubber boots. Off with the mask. The fake bearded face and red suit were removed. And then, attire man. What trick is this? Diable. Another costume and another mask after mask. A monk, a werewolf, a mummy, a devil, a demon, a man with no head, a leprechaun, a rabbit, un pelerin. It was nearly midnight, and the countdown from 10 had begun. But always another disguise, and then another odd stuff. A bottle of perfume with no lid, a dried out dead mouse, a leather-bound book of poems, but still no Higgins. 7, 6, 5. A tangle of cheesecloth, a burlap sack, a sock. There was hardly anything more to him. 3, 2, 1. And after dinner mint, a parking ticket. Hooray! Throughout the din, Claude, Peter, and I continued to rip and to grab at the scattered remnants of costumes everywhere strewn and thoroughly searched until there was nothing left.